consider something to be yours, something you keep in your home, something you have collected over years, something you have never given to anyone. You think you own it and you believe that this is enough. But one day you return and that thing is no longer there. No trace, no sign remains. And it is precisely at that moment that you understand that owning is merely a claim, while protecting and preserving is a responsibility. And between the two, you see that a silent yet destructive truth stands. Every generation has rediscovered this difference. Some discovered it very late, because property itself, the idea that something belongs to you, was never merely a legal concept. It always rested on a physical reality, and the most rooted expression of that physical reality lived in a very simple object. In the lock, everyone knows what a lock is. Metal, mechanism, used with a key. Among many people, it seems simple, but to understand its place in financial history, it must be looked at differently. The lock did not simply close a door, it drew the boundary of wealth. It turned the words, "This is mine," into real power. It lowered the concept of property from a floating claim to the level of a concrete economic fact. In other words, the lock was not merely a security device, it was a mechanism that played a silent yet decisive role in the formation of economic thinking. What was property without a lock? The question seems simple, but the answer is deep. Without a lock, owning something meant physically keeping it under control. You left, the goods were gone. You slept, the goods were gone. Property was considered to exist only when you were beside it. The moment your gaze was withdrawn, the guarantee was withdrawn as well. If it was not under your hand, it was no longer yours. This turned property into a heavy and expensive obligation, because preserving it required continuous physical presence. In the ancient world, the wealthy keeping slaves was not merely a matter of labor. They were mechanisms of control. The man standing in front of a merchant's warehouse was not just a guard. He represented the continuity of wealth. He was paid, but the work he did was more fundamental. He ensured that property remained real through his own presence. In that era, wealth was protected not by paper, but by people. Bodies worked more than law. Ownership was tied to physical presence. And this kept the economic system both costly and constantly at risk. This system had economic value, but it also had a major limitation, because every good required a person to protect it. Every person cost money, and every cause reduced profit. Protecting property was one of the greatest expenses of trade. The lock changed this calculation. For the first time, something could be protected without someone being there. The merchant could leave, the goods stayed, one could sleep, the warehouse remained untouched. This was not a simple technical change, it was a redefinition of property itself. The earliest lock mechanisms appeared approximately 4,000 years ago in Egypt and Mesopotamia. They were simple wooden pin locks. When the key entered, the pins lifted and the bolt opened. Technologically simple, but revolutionary in consequence. Because this mechanism separated control from the human for the first time. No longer did the man standing in front of the warehouse decide. The key did. Access was no longer tied to a person's body. It was tied to a small piece of metal. Whoever carried the key carried control. Whoever held control owned the property. This change fundamentally transformed the concept of property. Previously, property was physical, visible, touchable, protected by force. Now it was concentrated inside a key. The key was small, could be hidden, could be transferred. Thus, property was no longer defined by the body, but by an instrument of control. This laid the foundation for a transition to a stage in which economic relations became more flexible, but also more complex. What did this abstraction mean for finance? A great deal. Because abstract property is transferable property. And transferable property is the basis of the market. What did it mean to sell a warehouse without a lock? It meant physically leaving the place, taking the buyer there and telling him, "This is yours now." But from that moment on, the buyer himself had to stand there. Because property required physical control, buying and selling were also physical. The lock further mechanized this process. Giving the key was no longer just trust. It meant transferring ownership. Handing the warehouse key to a money changer carried the same meaning as pledging it as collateral. Making a copy of the key created shared rights. Thus, a small piece of metal began to embody entire economic relations: control, collateral, partnership. Ancient Rome built a complex and systematic legal model on this logic. The Roman system was considered one of the most developed and influential legal systems in world history. Yet for this system to remain functional, one condition was unchanging. Property had to physically exist, be protected, and be transferable when necessary. Law could exist, but its foundation was always real, protected, and manageable property. The lock was the technical support of this condition. Roman warehouses, Roman houses, Roman treasuries all rested on lock systems. Keys were inherited, sold, pledged as collateral. The abstract concepts of the legal system were realized through the movement of physical keys. In the Middle Ages in Europe, lock craftsmanship became a distinct economic field. Among blacksmiths, the lockmaster held a special position. Because what he produced was not merely metal, it was the guarantor of property. In major trading cities, the quality of a lock played a real role in economic life. A strong, unbreakable lock meant a more reliable warehouse. A reliable warehouse lowered insurance costs, increased creditworthiness, and expanded trade opportunities. This connection between lock quality and financial reliability was clearly understood at the time. A Venetian merchant did not view the money paid to the lockmaster merely as an expense, but as an investment, because that lock gave him something else: property that was protected and continued even while he slept. Property that continues while sleeping means wealth that continues while sleeping, and wealth that exists even in sleep is one of the most fundamental characteristics of capital. The lock made this possible. With the development of banks, the role of the lock changed, but it did not disappear. The first bank vaults, places where valuables were stored, rested entirely on lock systems. When a customer entrusted his gold to a banker, he was given a key, or a copy of the key remained with the customer. This physical key soon turned into a symbolic key. Deposit certificates, bills of exchange, later banknotes, all were abstracted forms of the key. A document saying, "This is your property, you can take it back whenever you wish." The lock was physical, but the financial instruments it created became increasingly abstract and intangible. The Industrial Revolution expanded the economic role of the lock once again. The multiplication of factories, warehouses, and means of transport made the protection of property more complex. The lock industry grew as well. No longer just simple household locks, but industrial locks, bank locks, vault locks emerged. Each new type of lock made a new property relationship possible. As bank vaults strengthened, people trusted storing money more. As trust increased, deposit volumes grew. As deposits grew, bank lending expanded. At the beginning of this chain, each time stood a more reliable lock. Today, the physical form of the lock still exists, but its economic lineage has moved into the digital world. A password is a lock. Two-factor authentication is a lock. Encryption on the blockchain is a lock. Technology has changed, the logic has remained the same. Whoever controls access controls property. Whoever controls property controls economic power. This law has not changed for thousands of years. Only the appearance and form of the lock have changed. Ports expanded trade, seals made property transferable. The lock, by protecting it, made it permanent. The economic meaning of property fully emerged only when it was visible, transferable, and protected at the same time. When these three conditions came together, capital was created. And when capital became possible, the financial system formed. The role of the lock in this birth remained invisible, but indispensable. Think about it. The password you use today to enter your digital account is, in essence, no different from the PIN lock of 4,000 years ago. How does that make you feel? If the protection of property is the foundation of finance, then today, which type of property do you think has the weakest lock? Let these be the kinds of questions that make you turn them over in your mind again and again. How simple inventions changed financial history. How technology redistributed economic power. This channel is exactly for that. Subscribe, and every week let us go deeper into those stories so you can see how the world you live in today was formed. If there is a moment in financial history you have always been curious about, write it in the comments. The next video will begin where your question ends.